Let's start today with Nietzsche's critique of Jerusalem, and especially of the slave revolt in morals, the Judeo-Christian worldview, and as he sees it, the slave revolt in morals. This is a set of concepts that I've covered to some extent on Thursday, but I want to unpack it at greater length today. Let me tell you a story. This is from Nietzsche's perspective. A long time ago, there was this ancient people group called the Jews. And the Jews were very weak and feeble. They had strong traditions and strong family structures, but everyone conquered them. First, the Egyptians conquered them and, in fact, enslaved them. Then other people groups like the Assyrians and the Babylonians conquered them. Still other groups later, like the Greeks and the Romans, conquered the Jews. And the Jews were unable, physically speaking, to resist any of these conquerors. They were a weak people, at least in terms of political power. But according to Nietzsche, the Jews got together, and even in spite of their weakness, they conspired to find a way to overcome the overcomers, to beat the powerful at their own game. Being weak, the Jews could not beat them on a field of battle. They could not physically overpower their conquerors. So instead, what they sought to do was to get inside the minds of their conquerors and to convince them no longer to think as conquerors. In that sense, Nietzsche's criticism of Judeo-Christian morality is similar to his criticism of Socrates, the idea of getting inside the minds of others. So what the Jews did was they devised a value system, which we might call the Great Reversal. And in this value system, they sought to persuade the powerful of this world not to be powerful, or at least to be ashamed of their power. Think about the great moral texts of the New Testament. Without a doubt, Matthew 5 is at the top of the list. This is Jesus of Nazareth's Sermon on the Mount. But other famous moral passages include Luke 6, the Sermon on the Plain, Galatians 5, the Apostle Paul's epistle to the Galatians, where he talks about the fruits of the Spirit. The kinds of values that are celebrated in these famous Christian moral passages include things like love for your enemies, okay, things like kindness, doing good to others, doing good to those who hate you, for instance. Other values that are celebrated include humility, not puffing yourself up or being arrogant or proud, but instead recognizing your own station and your own feebleness, acknowledging your limitations. Or self-control, recognizing that instinctual behaviors can be sinful, especially when taken to excess. The good Christian is supposed to limit his behaviors and not to indulge in appetites in ways that are destructive. These kinds of values have been central to the Christian tradition. And it's a very famous part of the Christian moral heritage, the Great Reversal. The weak things of this world, in God's eyes, are more important than the strong. God has chosen the poor. God cares about the poor. God cares about the feeble. God will elevate the humble. These are all central Christian ideals. Okay, it's a central part of my own worldview. The idea that one ought not to put oneself forward, but one ought instead to acknowledge the advantages and skills of others, and one ought to not just think about one's own interests, but also think about the interests of others. These values, according to Nietzsche, are slave values. They are the values of a weak and feeble people. The Jews, being weak, though, were also cunning, and they sought to impart these values and spread them around the world. They sought in particular to convince the powerful, and Nietzsche has in mind mostly the Romans here, but other people groups as well. They sought to convince the powerful no longer to be powerful, but instead to absorb values of weakness and of slaves. And so the powerful may still continue to hold power, but they would always feel ashamed and apologize for it. They would always feel as though they should not express their power openly, but should try to hide it or control it. And in this sense, Nietzsche thinks what happened in history is that the Jews were successful. In fact, if you look over the millennia, the Jews won. The Jews were incredibly successful because the Jews convinced everybody in the Western heritage to accept these slave values, the values of the Jews. Their vehicle was the Christian religion. Christian religion was a conspiracy devised by two Jews and a Jewess. Okay, Peter, Paul, and Mary. And this Christian religion was used to coerce the coercers, to conquer the conquerors, and to overwhelm the powerful from the inside, as it were. This is all part of a very famous set of criticisms that Nietzsche packages together as a general slave revolt. And he thinks it's indicative of a decline in Western values. It's taken place over the millennia. But the slaves have won. The weak and the feeble have won. And even though we have told ourselves a story about advance and progress, for Nietzsche, it has not been a story of advance and progress. It has been a story of decline, of weakness, of feebleness, and of failure. The example of America can also be used here. Okay, so what values are central to the American consciousness? Well, two values for sure are central to the thoughts and minds of all Americans. Those values are equality and liberty. Let's take, though, the value of equality real briefly. What is this value? What does it mean? The value of equality, of course, is an ideal in America. It's not something that is realized very often in practice. So I recognize that the idea of being equal before the law is often not practically realized. I'm not disputing that. But for sure, in theory at least, Americans would hold together to the value of equality and say, yeah, all people are equal before the law. But if you inspect this value and you think about some of its background assumptions and connotations, Nietzsche would say this is a slave value. Because what it does is it actually peddles a fiction. The fiction is that the weak are the same as the strong. It brings the strong down. It elevates the weak to make all men equal before the law. Again, just in theory. I recognize in practice this often doesn't happen in America. In bringing the strong down and elevating the weak, the value of equality ends up harming humans, according to Nietzsche. It ends up damaging us by undermining our natural instincts to strive, to be strong, to overcome, to conquer, to succeed. An equal people is a mediocre people. A people that are all the same, peoples who are all the same, are mediocre. They are not successes, they are rather failures, because they have lost the ability, the motive, the drive to overcome, to conquer, to succeed in life. And Nietzsche would very, very much be, were he alive today, a critic of American values. What this means, more generally, is that everyone in the Western tradition has drunk the Jewish poison. Okay, everyone, Christian or non-Christian, has drunk the Jewish poison. Jews won so thoroughly, Nietzsche thinks, that what they ended up doing is they ended up actually controlling the minds, not just the Christian heritage, but also the non-Christians as well. It's not just Christians who hold, for example, to the value of equality. It's a value that all sorts of different Americans share. And in doing so, the Jews, in controlling them in this way, the Jews, Nietzsche would say, have ended up conquering everyone. They have successfully infiltrated all of our minds and have elevated their own weak, slave-like values to a dominant position. That's Nietzsche's story about the heritage of values from Jerusalem. It's a story of decline. It's a very critical, harsh story. And he thinks that it's a paradoxical story because even though we have told ourselves that it is better to be at peace than to fight, it is better to serve than to dominate, it is better to love than to hate. Even though we have told ourselves that, what actually has happened is precisely the opposite of what we expected. We have not advanced, we have declined. We have become feeble shadows of the instinctual warriors that we once were. And like I've mentioned before, his guides here are the warrior cultures of the pre-Socratic era, the Iliad and the Odyssey, where you see these warriors driven by passion and vengeance, the kinds of values that the Judeo-Christian worldview says we're supposed to limit and to squelch. We're not to seek vengeance, we are to leave that to God, right? So that's the sort of thing that Nietzsche is idealizing here. Let me stop and ask if there are questions or comments so far about this very famous Nietzschean critique of morality in Western culture and about the heritage from Jerusalem. Has there been a slave revolt in morals? Is this Christian notion of loving your enemies, of being kind, of being at peace, of being humble, is this a morality of weakness? Is this a morality of failure? Yeah, he thinks that we've all drunk the Jewish poison, and the morals that we have are all morals of slaves, of weak people, morals of feeble Jews. The morals that we have are actually doing deep damage to our ability to flourish as human beings because they're not incentivizing us to go out there and to strive and to conquer. Instead, we are endeavoring to live at peace with each other, to be, he would say, mediocre in our peace and in our kindness and generosity to each other. Mm-hmm. In the conquest for Nietzsche comes human success. So by virtue of the heroic struggle required to win, in beating others, in destroying others, humans are pushed to their greatest limits and become more successful and flourish more as humans than they would otherwise do in circumstances where they live at peace and in harmony and love each other, etc. Mm-hmm.
Rebuttal to this would be that in working together and not fighting or subjugating others, it brings more enlightenment to us and more cooperation to where we can achieve greater heights because we are working together and there's not animosity between different people groups and we're all able to work together to achieve greater things.
I think that's a terrific comeback, Matthew. I totally agree with you, man. I think that there have been few greater achievements of humans since World War II than the fact that we have not had a general war since that time. I think that's been an extraordinary achievement, and the cooperation that has come with that, I think, has led to incredible prosperity around the world. Now, it could be argued, of course, that the only reason why we haven't had a general war since World War II is because we now have weapons of mass destruction that ensure mutual destruction if we do have a general war, if we ever do have a general war. Fair enough, but the fact that we live at peace, for whatever reason, I think has brought about incredible prosperity to many peoples around the world, whereas previous generations with their constant warfare were not. experiencing that. So I'm with you. I totally think that cooperation does lead to greater overall prosperity. Yeah, Charles. Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Survival of the fittest. Yeah. And to set up society, think about it this way. Here's an example of a degenerate social institution. Christianity tells us that we are supposed to give charitably to the impoverished peoples. Okay, we're supposed to help the unfortunates. Right? Churches run sandwich ministries for homeless people. Some churches offer homeless shelters. There are funds that are given by churches to people who are in need. And the justification for all of this is that we are supposed to love the last, the least, and the lost. As Christians, churches, people in churches feel obligated to care for those who are the most enfeebled. Okay, but what does this actually do? Well, think about it from an evolutionary perspective. This is what Nietzsche would say. Okay, and this is going to be a bit of a long answer to your question, Charles, but it's a great question. Think about it from an evolutionary perspective. If evolution has taught us anything, it is that the natural world is a jungle struggle for all the marbles where the winners get to pass on their DNA to future generations and the losers don't. And so what Christians are doing by helping out the poor is they are ensuring that those poor people are around to make more poor people. Better would be for us not to help the poor and let them die off. Because if they die off, they are not going to be around to make more poor people. It's pretty clear if you look at it that poverty is a generational phenomenon. Those people who are impoverished tend to have children who become themselves impoverished. And so it goes down through the generations. So Nietzsche would say, let them die so as to get rid of the poverty problem. So that the only people who are able to pass on their genes are the fit, the strong, the wealthy, those who have mental success in life, those who have creativity, innovation, knowledge. Those are the people who should be allowed to breed and to pass on their genes. To artificially sustain populations that are not evolutionarily successful is to promote enfeeblement and weakness in the human race. That would be his answer to your question. Survival of the fittest is exactly the way he would advocate approaching life. I don't think he'd believe in determinism. So I don't think it's determinism that he's an advocate of. I do think, though, that he thinks that we should set up the world so that the strong are able to dominate. Yeah. The whole even playing field idea is something he would disagree with very much oppose that. So the idea that we ought to give some people who have had poor circumstances or impoverished educations or something like that special advantages so as to elevate them, to give them success where they previously had not had those advantages. That's an idea that just leads to further weakness being passed on in the culture. Because if those people couldn't cut it on their own without assistance, then giving them assistance just ensures that their feebleness, their lack of ability, will continue in the society. Right, yeah. Sure. So some people are impoverished due to choice. Some people are impoverished due to circumstances that have happened to them. Okay, and of course, most people are a mix of the two. I think that, and here I'm treading on a little bit of uncertain territory because I'm not quite sure what Nietzsche would say here. But I know for sure that he would say that if it's impoverishment due to choice, let him die. A welfare program, a government-sponsored welfare program, or a church-sponsored assistance program that gives assistance to those kinds of people just perpetuates the cycle of weakness. But if it's impoverishment due to circumstance, although I'm not quite sure what Nietzsche would say here, still, since it's so hard to separate circumstances that have happened to you from what your own choices are, okay, that's all really hard to separate for people. He probably would say, let him die, so as to cleanse the human race of the element of weakness in it. Look, guys, this is not my worldview, but it is his, and it's, it's got a certain, well, let's actually consider it for just a second. Do Christian charity programs perpetuate enfeeblement in the human race? To a certain extent, Matthew says, okay? What do we think? You guys speak up a little bit, Zaire. He forgets everyone is human and we all need each other. Sure, right? Yep. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, man, I totally agree with you that Nietzsche's interpretation of Christian values is totally one-sided. It's very skewed. I think it's incredibly one-sided. Look, guys, here's my take on this. I agree with him. Like Matthew said, I agree with him to some extent. I think Christian charity does perpetuate weakness. But you know what? I don't know when I'm gonna, what's gonna happen to me tomorrow. I don't know. I could wake up tomorrow and I could have some disease or something like that that's gonna make me lose my capacities. I would much rather live in a world where other people are compassionate and willing to help me in those circumstances than a world where people aren't charitable to each other. And if you do happen to be one of the people who, has bad circumstances happen to you, they just sort of tossed you aside on the rubbish heap. That's not the kind of world I want to live in. Yes, I think that to some extent Nietzsche's criticism is right, and Christian charity does perpetuate weakness. But since I agree with Charles that all of us, and Zaire, that all of us are dependent on each other, I think that I'd much rather live in a world where weakness is perpetuated, but at the same time, humans help each other, than a world where that doesn't happen. This perspective, this criticism of the slave revolt and morals and his strong viewpoint, as you say, Zaire, I think is like the arrogant perspective of somebody who hasn't faced sufficient hardship in life. If you faced sufficient hardship in life, you know how much better it is to live in a world where people help each other than a world where they do not. Yeah, Charles.
Like, you can just look at him like, he look like a bum off the street. He just weak. He at the bottom of the human food chain.
Sure.
But, he was to say, he was a
Right? Yeah. Maybe, like, given where he started, he's actually done really well.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you just don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's a great comment, and that would be one of my responses to Nietzsche, since this is certainly something that I don't think it would be a good world at all if we were to do away with charitable programs. Let me move to another point. And I've mentioned before that I disagree with just about everything that Nietzsche said, but this is an area of Nietzsche where I perhaps agree to some extent with what he said. And this is his criticism of the Enlightenment. I've mentioned before in class that the Enlightenment was an era of human endeavor in the 18th century where human beings privileged reason. And they sought to use reason to unpack the natural world and their own capacities. And there was just this general giddiness and excitedness about the operations of reason. But in typical Nietzschean fashion, Nietzsche says, well, this has all actually been a mistaken view of things. Every step forward in the development of reason and the deployment of reason has been a step backward, maybe 2 steps backward even, because he doesn't think that it's an advance, he thinks it's a decline. Let's illustrate this using the example of science and technology. Let's think about technology as an illustration of this. Let me list some technologies here, common consumer technologies that we all benefit from. The dishwasher, the washing machine, the dryer, the automobile, the bicycle, the airplane, the train. What do all of these technologies have in common? What do they do for human beings? Well, some of them are transportation technologies, but some were actually like the dishwasher or the washing machine.
They're all utilities that we use. They have a purpose. They're used in purpose. They aid us.
They aid us in some way, and in particular, what they all have in common is they make life easier.
Yeah.
They make hard tasks easier. They make long and arduous tasks more convenient. Traveling somewhere would take a long time except for the technologies that we have, okay, et cetera, et cetera. All right, Nietzsche is deeply critical of this kind of a deployment of reason. Think about some of the technologies and think about what they have done to us. Let me take as an example my smartphone. Okay, I have an ancient smartphone. You guys want to see an antique? This is an iPhone 4S. Like you didn't have any idea these things still existed. You know what? It still exists and it still runs really well. The reason why it runs well is because I have said no to Apple's updates for years and years. And my phone runs fine, thank you very much, because I rejected all the updates. Okay, but my smartphone has a contacts list. And once upon a time, I remember back before we had smartphones, shows my age, but once upon a time, I had to memorize phone numbers. Now I just scroll through my contacts list and I hit a name. Nietzsche would say what the technology has done is actually paradoxical. In making life more convenient, it has actually weakened my capacities as a human being. Whereas previously, I was mentally more acute, now I'm just dependent on this contacts list. To take another example, I used to do a lot of mental arithmetic, mental math. And now I just whip out my smartphone and I use the calculator function and I don't have to think it through in my head because I've got a technology that does it for me. I am weaker mentally as a result of what was told to me was progress. Okay, I could offer some other examples too. I drove to school today, this morning, at the beginning of the school day, in my car, in luxury, in air-conditioned ease, listening to music. I did not walk to school sweating in arduous conditions. I'm weaker physically as a result. Weaker mentally because of my smartphone. I'm weaker physically because of my car. My car has actually, in the name of progress and advancement, it has actually harmed my physical capacities. And the same could be said for other forms of transportation. Yeah, Charles.
So like, what about medicine?
Good.
Like now, like more healthy than we live
Yeah. That's a great comment. So that's actually, like, medicines are a major reason why I do not want to turn back the clock. And I would not want to live 200 years ago because the medicines are so great now. I guess the Nietzschean criticism would be when you have the antibiotic to help you kick the virus, you aren't doing it. Your body's not doing it, forced to go through the tough, difficult task of doing it on its own. Famous Nietzschean quote is, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Okay? You guys thought Kelly Clarkson said that. It's actually Nietzsche.
So if you tear an ACL or break a bone, it's like, well, the bone heal by itself.
Yeah, you gotta do it yourself on the Nietzschean way of seeing things. Gotta do it yourself. Otherwise, the technology weakens you. Yeah, totally, right? So if you think about Walley, Walley is like the end result of Western culture. That seems to be where we're headed, isn't it? Yeah, it's because, like, we get fatter, we get, diabetes rates are heading through the roof, we get more obese each year because stuff does stuff for us and we don't have to do it ourselves. And you guys have all maybe seen or heard of Walley, yes? The movie? Okay, it's been a long time. I think I remember him. What is he? He's got a robot, right? It works. Oh, he is the robot. He is the robot. And people use him because they're all just sitting around in their chairs. And he's like their servant, right? Is that the way? I think I remember the movie. Yeah. Oh, yeah, they all trashed Earth. That's right. I remember now. Yeah. Yeah. So Walley is like that. That's basically his criticism of reason and of technology. Okay, is that in the name of progress, it's actually harmed human beings. Good point. Yeah. Well, so let's think about this for a second. First of all, let's take his criticisms and evaluate those, and then let's ask what to do with them. So have technologies made us weaker? Right?
Like that has made like us like there's better ways to do things.
Well, definitely technologies lead to spoiling and trashing the environment. That's been happening where previous generations weren't doing that. We're doing it now. What about us, though, as human beings? Like, are we weaker physically and mentally as a result of technology? Sure. Yeah.
I guess you lose as you gain. Like you lose because people you was walking towards class and like everybody was on their phone and you was beautiful day. So I guess you lose you lose something, but you also gain they'll probably text you.
Oh, I know. Like, we have amazing communications technologies now. I can be on my phone communicating with somebody thousands of miles away. That's unreal. I would not trade that for anything. Like, that's terrific. That's really great. I guess the part of Nietzsche that I find at least partially convincing here is I think he's onto something when he says that the technology maybe has weakened us physically and mentally, but I would qualify it and say it only weakens us physically and mentally if we let it, if we're not prudent in our use of it. So if you do take the car to go to the local convenience store rather than walking, let's say it's a short trip, right? Rather than walking the quarter mile to get there, yeah, I mean that's probably not the best choice. You could be pushing yourself a little more physically. If you do take the technologies for granted and become weaker emotionally as a result, that's probably an example of enfeeblement. Like, for instance, 150 years ago, our ancestors would have been absolutely floored by the prospect of flying from Texas to California. Like that would have been unbelievable. It would have been floored by that technology that we have right now. But I have been in planes that have flown from Texas to California, and the pilot will come on as we're nearing our landing spot, our destination, and he'll say, we're going to need to circle for 20 minutes longer before we land. And people are like, you know, like, this stupid airline, like, you know, like you're in a chair sitting in the sky, and you're like, you're so ticked at the airline company for wasting 20 minutes of your time.
And it's not like they could do, and it's not like they could do anything about it either. Usually when that happens, it's because of the stuff that's going on the ground.
Right. Oh, yeah, for sure. So anyway, I guess if he wants to say that if people are not using it correctly and are becoming like emotionally weaker as a result, you know, they're not persevering. They're just like, they're overwhelmed by the prospect of losing 20 minutes, right? This emotionally weak result. I think if that's the critique, then I agree with that. Yeah.
I would definitely say that we've become less patient as a people as technology.
Oh, yeah.
So much. Like if it takes like 3 seconds longer to load a webpage, we're like, what's going on?
Oh, I know. Yeah. Like if my little hourglass is like running on there for like, 5 seconds, I'm like, I don't have all day. It's amazing how people.
If it takes them a little bit longer to get our food ready at this fast food restaurant, they're like, man, these people are just, this is poor service.
You're
Because
totally right.
I'm not able to, because I have to wait 5 minutes to get a full 3-course meal.
The technology is amazing these days, and people aren't happy.
Yeah.
They're like angry that it's not better. So I guess my response to Nietzsche would probably, on this particular criticism of the Enlightenment would be, yes, he's right, sort of. Like as long as we are prudent in our use of the technology, it doesn't have to harm us mentally and physically or emotionally.
I feel like,
Yeah, then Charles, yeah, go ahead.
I feel like with technology and stuff, if we were to find the right way to do something, we would like try to do it. Guys, like let's say we found a way to like I don't know, like to flying cars and stuff. Then we would just like we just keep.
We'd all be upset that the flying cars weren't going faster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you push to go like further. Like I don't think we would ever stop trying to make new technology.
Right,
There
yeah.
would be a point where we're just like, okay, everything's good, we're just gonna keep it how it is. Like we'll never do that. And I feel like that's gonna be a problem in the future.
Yeah, I think you may be right. Charles, you get the last word on this topic before we take a break.
He still benefited from stuff that he had.
Oh, yeah.
That didn't
Yeah.
exist, like, before he was born. So I'm like, when I get mad.
Isn't it great when people get angry and criticize the stuff that actually gave them their own success?
I'm just waiting for transporters.
Yeah, well, that'll be
Star
fun.
Trek, come on.
That'll be fun. Yeah, so
You didn't beat me up fast enough.
actually, that particular technology, I hope it comes about, but I'm a little skeptical of whether that'll ever come about because we have to actually destroy human bodies to accomplish it. But
I think you would die once you die.
then you create a new version of it, you recreate it. But anyway, yeah, I guess, I mean, definitely I would not want to turn back the clock because if I had lived 200 years ago, I would have died at age 3 of an ear infection if it weren't for the antibiotics. So I would not want to turn back the clock there. But I guess that this particular criticism of all of the Nietzschean criticisms is one that I may have some sympathy with, and I would say, I guess it would make me a more cautious user of technologies, rather than just kind of an unreflective user of technologies. Maybe I'll make a phone call or have some personal contact instead of just posting on somebody's Facebook page or something like that.
From, like, a lot of mental health at the end of his life, like, mental health is excessively now.
Oh, yeah. Mental health, I think we have lots more resources now to deal with that, for sure. For sure, without a doubt. Okay, friends, let's go ahead and talk about a couple of other last key Nietzschean concepts. I wouldn't be a good self-respecting Nietzsche instructor if I didn't mention these. Okay, one concept is the death of God. Okay, Nietzsche is a literary stylist as much as he is a philosopher. A lot of people think that he's not really a philosopher. He really should be taught in literature classes because he's opposed to reason. He doesn't want to use reason to impact the world. Instead, he thinks that we should approach the world in terms of perspectives and literary stylistics. Anyway, one of his very famous literary metaphors is as follows. This happens in a text called Die Fröhliche Wissenschaft. Which translated, this word meant a different thing back then, but it translated means the gay science, okay? And one day in a marketplace, the sun was shining and people were exchanging goods with each other, and a madman entered the marketplace. And he was carrying a lantern. And everyone was startled by his presence. But then he said to them, "Where is God?" as he held up his lantern. "Where is God?" And they laughed at him because God had not come to the marketplace that day and was not to be found there. And then he looked around at each one of them, and with his steely-eyed glance, as he held his lantern aloft, he made them feel ashamed and cower. And he pointed to each one of them and he said, "I'll tell you where God is. You have killed him. Each one of you has killed him. He is dead because you have killed him." Okay, now this is a very famous Nietzschean scene that he describes. And he's talking about modernity. And he says, basically, look, this incredible phenomenon has taken place in modernity. And the phenomenon is human beings have made a world where it is possible not to believe in God. This doesn't mean that human beings don't believe in God. A lot of people do. I do. I believe in God. I don't think you can explain the universe without it, without God's existence. But we have created a world where it is possible. The tools are there for people not to believe in God. And when the madman points at each one of the people in the marketplace and says, "You have killed God," what Nietzsche is trying to illustrate in this famous scene is he's trying to say that actually it's not as though people against their will must not believe in God. Rather, it is that human choices have brought about a world where it is possible for God to be absent. Let's just take one example of this. Let's take the theory of evolution and the mechanism by which Darwin explores by which he unpacks the theory of evolution, the mechanism of natural selection. Famously, Charles Darwin says in Origin of Species that the means by which the genes get passed on to the next generation are natural selection processes. It's a war of all against all, a jungle struggle. And in that jungle struggle, nature selects. It's not as though God selects on Darwin's view. And what I think is key here is that Darwin has actually made conscious choices in framing the theory of evolution rhetorically using the words natural selection. I'm a theistic evolutionist. I think that evolution was the process and God guided it. But Darwin, in choosing the words natural selection, is basically saying that the best way to conceive of this process is to slough off the creator idea and to personify nature and say that nature chooses who will survive and who will not. That, without a doubt, friends, is the kind of a conscious choice that Nietzsche is referring to when he says that you and I in modernity have killed God. That is the kind of conscious choice that he's referring to when he's talking about people conceiving of a world in the absence of a divine figure. Now, if God is dead, as Nietzsche says, if God is dead, then what are we to make of human beings? Nietzsche's own view is that if God is dead, then anything goes. If God is dead, then anything goes. Because there is not any cosmic figure to provide us with a standard of justice and a sense of truth and of ultimate meaning. Your life is meaningless in the absence of God's existence, according to Nietzsche. I agree with him on that, actually. I think that our lives are meaningless if God doesn't exist. Should have done that off camera.
You can edit it out later.
And YouTube, when I upload these videos, they select, just randomly, it seems to me, the thumbnail, so they'll probably select that. Anyway, so if God exists, anything goes. And I agree with Nietzsche that if God exists, if God does not exist, then anything goes. I agree with Nietzsche that if God does not exist, then life is meaningless. Nietzsche thinks that in the absence of meaning, what we must do as human beings is create meaning for ourselves. Okay, if God is dead, then we've got to make values, we've got to make meaning for ourselves. This is, again, his view, not mine. He thinks that if God is dead, then what we need is a figure that he calls the Übermensch. This is a German word that just means Superman or Overman. I'll just translate it as Superman. The Übermensch is someone who makes values for himself. He recognizes that his life is meaningless, but he gives meaning to his life by choosing his own values and making himself the source of meaning and of value. This is a really big difference between the Nietzschean worldview and, more generally, the worldviews of all the people who've been influenced by Nietzsche in contemporary life and the classical Christian worldview. This is a really big difference. In the classical Christian worldview, the worldview that I hold, we are to obey. We are to follow values that come from outside of us, given to us by God, for our good, for our welfare. Okay, the rules that I believe God has given to us are actually so that we can be more free than we would otherwise be, because people generally they flourish better when they live within the context of the rules that God gives them. But those values come from outside of us. On the Nietzschean worldview, though, the values that matter are the ones that we generate from inside of us. It is the values that we make for ourselves that matter the most, according to Nietzsche. Since, on his view, God does not exist, any value system that is based on God's existence is a fiction. So what we have to do in the absence of God is to create from within what we find to be meaningful. And that's what the Übermensch does, the Superman. This is a key Nietzschean concept, like I said, and it's an idea that has been widely influential in contemporary life. How many times these days do we hear people say things like, I have to do what's right for me, or I want to choose something here that expresses my own thoughts and beliefs. The idea of conforming to the expectations of somebody from without is seen by a lot of contemporary people as being sometimes even immoral, but at the very least, not prudent. Rather, you should chart your own way in life. You should choose your own values. You should make yourself into a meaningful phenomenon. You should express yourself. You should find your own identity. Give your own person some external expression. This is a very widespread approach to life these days. It's part of Nietzsche's enduring influence. It is an approach that is almost impossible, I think, to square with Christianity. Okay, and probably this is the part of Nietzsche that I find the hardest to grapple with in terms of understanding it and appreciating it. The reason why is because if you yourself, in my view at least, are the generator of your values, then you live in a really reduced, diminished world. It is by conformity to things that are larger than ourselves that I think we find meaning and flourishing, in particular conformity to God's expectations for our lives. 1 minute, Charles, I'll get you in just a minute. And I really have trouble with this idea in Nietzsche. I just don't buy it. I don't think that people can live happy lives if they conceive of themselves as the source and the generator of meaning. I think happiness comes from living in accordance with ideas and values and concepts that are larger than us. One of the great 20th century moral teachers, I think, was Pope John Paul II. And one of his famous quotes is, "Blessed is the man who has found a reason for living that is larger than himself." Blessed is the man who has found a reason for living that is larger than himself. And that's like a very anti-Nietzschean quote, but it's one that I really think captures human flourishing much more successfully than the idea that we should generate our own values. Let me go to Charles first, and then I'll come back to you, Zaire. Well, go ahead, Charles. Yeah, so Nietzsche he's not a systematic thinker, so he doesn't really think about what his ideas would look like in society. Obviously, I don't think it would work very well if the values that you find meaningful are values that end up doing harm to me or to others. Okay, like I think last time we were talking about Zaire wanting to throw his left hooks, right? So he doesn't really think about how his ideas would work in society. But my second response to that is contemporary people in borrowing Nietzschean ideas, all the relativism and all the self as the generator of meaning and of value and all that. It's always been a selective borrowing. They have never borrowed the whole of Nietzsche. It's always been selective because they're not really relativists at the end of the day. They're not really strictly capable of standing on their own and generating their own values. They always end up borrowing stuff from outside of themselves. And they always end up living in accordance with stuff that, they think gives them a larger sense of meaning. So it's always been a selective borrowing from Nietzsche. Zaire? No, he does not believe in God. That's correct.
So does he believe that people have to give their own meaning to their meaningless life?
Yes, absolutely. Make of your life an artistic phenomenon by creating meaning for yourself, would be his way of seeing things. Yeah. Generate your own values. Make your life into an artistic phenomenon by doing your own thing, being yourself. Isn't that like the message of a lot of the Disney movies these days, is to be yourself? To express your own deep identity or something like that. It's a Nietzschean message. It comes from Nietzsche. Although it's, of course, a modified Nietzsche. The society has not borrowed Nietzsche wholesale. It's been always a partial borrow. It's not been a wholesale borrow. But the idea of looking within yourself rather than looking outside of yourself for your sources of meaning and value, like the Disney princesses do, that's a Nietzschean idea. Mm-hmm. Good. Last thoughts on this concept? Sorry we have to end the semester on Nietzsche. That's kind of a downer, isn't it? Let me say a couple of summary things, and then I'll let you guys go. This has been a rapid course where we have done an overview of a variety of different philosophers. Okay, and it's not been a topical course in the sense that it hasn't been structured by topic, which some intro to philosophy courses are. This has been a course that has been structured by thinker. And we have looked at these thinkers historically. In the ancient world, we looked at Plato and Aristotle. In the medieval world, we looked at Aquinas and Augustine. In the modern world, we looked at Descartes, and we looked at Pascal. And then in the Enlightenment and post-Enlightenment eras, we looked at Hume and Nietzsche. And we have used these thinkers to unpack topics. Plato's interest in metaphysics, which is a key area of philosophy, for instance, or Aristotle on ethics, or Augustine on philosophy of religion, or Descartes on epistemology and the theory of knowledge, or Hume on philosophy of science. We have used these studies of individual thinkers to unpack particular topics along the way. And so we have, through thinkers, done a topical survey in the course of this course. Okay, I wish we could end the course in the 20th century with some 20th century thinkers, but because of time constraints, it was decided by the department to end this course with Nietzsche. We will devote next class sessions doing one practical ethics topic, okay? And it's just meant to illustrate how you apply philosophy to a particular practical ethics topic these days. I'm going to be illustrating it with both sides. It's the abortion issue. I'll be talking about pro-choice and pro-life views and the background that they both come from. And I'll talk about the philosophical basis for each of these views. Come on Thursday if you're interested. Okay, but that's kind of a separate thing from most of the curriculum this semester. I have enjoyed this semester very much. Thank you for your attention this semester. Thank you for journeying alongside me as we have studied these difficult thinkers. Let me urge you, if you have not read, to take some of your free time this summer. I mean, I know this is a mind-boggling idea, but go back and grapple with some hard texts, because it really is only half the course to just sit and lecture and take notes. The other half is pushing yourself to understand hard texts so that you expand your mind by dealing with these thinkers and the hard thoughts that they have developed. Okay, let me say a quick prayer for us to just to bless your last couple weeks here in class and in the semester, and then I will go ahead and let you go, although I do want to invite you all on Thursday. If you do want to come to class, you're certainly welcome to do so. Let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you for bringing us this far in this semester. I thank you for these students. I thank you for the blessing that they have been to me and for the opportunity to journey alongside them in studying these important thinkers through history. I pray that you would now strengthen them over the last couple weeks of their classes so that they would have discipline, insight, wisdom, guidance, and reflective capacity to do their very best on their final exams and in completing their papers and other final projects. I pray also that you would give them rest after the semester is over so that they might recover from the rigors of the academic year. Lord, you have strengthened us throughout this semester and this very difficult, very strange school year. We pray for your strength and grace to go a little bit further, another couple of weeks, and we thank you for the blessings that you've given us throughout this semester. Amen. All right, friends, you have a wonderful day. Have a great afternoon, and I'm looking forward to seeing some of you in the fall, and others of you, if you stick around on campus, maybe sooner. Okay? You guys take care.